When Javier Luján, a 55-year-old businessman who had built his fortune brick by brick, sat down to dine at the most exclusive restaurant in Barcelona, he never imagined that a simple comment from a young waitress would turn his entire world upside down. As he absent-mindedly swirled a glass of red wine, a soft and hesitant voice broke through his silence. "Excuse me, sir, but that ring you're wearing, my mother has one exactly like it." Javier, a man long trapped in a routine of silence and memories, slowly turned his head toward the young woman. His gaze fell to the piece of jewelry adorning his left ring finger, an antique white gold ring with sky blue sapphire set between tiny diamonds. His face went pale. That ring was no ordinary accessory. It was a family heirloom steeped in history and pain. There were only 3 authentic copies in the world. The first was on his hand. The second had mysteriously vanished in 1998 during a storm in the Mediterranean. And the third was supposedly buried with the only woman he had ever truly loved, Natalia, the woman who had changed his life, the woman whose memory still haunted him, even after nearly 3 decades since her sudden disappearance. Barcelona, November 2024. El Imperio del Mar, nestled in the heart of Paseo de Gracia, wasn't just a restaurant. It was the epicenter of the country's most exclusive meetings. Deals worth millions were sealed within its golden walls. And so were secrets, political alliances, whispered betrayals, and rumors that never made it past the marble floors. Javier Luján, founder of a luxury cruise empire operating in 22 countries, always sat at the same table, by the window, overlooking the lit fountain. No one dared disturb him. No one asked questions. Until now, he wore a custom-tailored dark suit, silver cufflinks, and a gray silk tie. His graying hair, neatly combed, gave him an air of power and tragedy. That evening, he had come to toast alone, for his company's anniversary, and for the memory of Natalia, the woman he had once dreamed of building an empire with, until fate had cruelly ripped her away. "Would you like more wine, Mr. Luján?" A timid female voice cut through his thoughts. He lifted his gaze slowly. Standing before him was a young woman, no older than 24. Her expression caught somewhere between reverence and confusion. Her name, Tag read Laura. Dark hair braided simply. Brown eyes filled with quiet questions. Her voice gentle, courteous, but tinged with unease. She trembled slightly, as if struggling to process something in real time. Javier nodded in silence as she poured the wine. But then he noticed something, the way she looked at him. It wasn't the gaze of a waitress attending an important customer. It was something else. "Is something wrong?" Javier asked, his tone calm, though a quiet alarm was already ringing inside. Laura hesitated, eyes lowering for a moment. "I'm sorry if this is out of place, sir," she said finally. "But could I ask about the ring you're wearing?" Time stopped. Javier looked down at his left hand. His chest tightened. "My ring," he murmured. "Yes." Laura's voice nearly cracked. "It's just my mother has one exactly like it." Without knowing it, Laura had just opened the door to a past Javier had spent decades trying to bury. A past full of love, betrayal, loss, and a truth so impossible it could shake the very foundation of his reality. Laura stepped a little closer to the table, lowering her voice even further, like what she was about to say might alter the very air around them. "Mr. Luján, forgive me, but my mother's ring looks exactly like yours." Javier felt as if ice had stabbed straight through his chest. His entire body tensed. For a few seconds, he couldn't respond. His eyes locked on hers, searching for some logical explanation. "That's not possible," he whispered, barely audible. "This ring is one of a kind. It's been in my family for generations. No one outside our bloodline ever had one." "I understand," Laura said, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "I know it sounds strange, but I swear, when I saw your ring, my heart stopped. It's just like the one my mom has worn my whole life." Javier's pulse thundered like a war drum, echoing through the elegant quiet of the restaurant. This was no ordinary ring. It was one of 3, commissioned by his great-grandfather, Don Ignacio Luján, in Paris in 1890. each one a symbol of legacy and blood. The first, Javier had inherited from his father. The second was lost when his twin brother, Sebastian, died tragically during an expedition in the Alps. And the third, Javier swallowed hard. He looked at the young woman in front of him, his face a mixture of fear and hope. "What's your mother's name?" he asked, voice trembling. "Clara Ruiz," Laura replied without hesitation. "Do you know her?" Javier's world collapsed beneath him. Clara, that was the real name of the woman he had loved more than anything. His Clara, but it couldn't be. Not after what happened. Not after the funeral. His Clara had died 25 years ago. Or so he had believed. He had been at her burial. He had wept at her grave. He had mourned her with a pain that never truly healed. "How old is your mother?" Javier asked, barely able to breathe. 47, Laura answered, looking concerned. "Are you all right, Mr. Luján?" The air disappeared from his lungs. 47. That was the exact age Clara would be today, if she were alive. But that was impossible. Or at least, that's what he had believed for 25 years. He covered his mouth with one hand, trying to contain the scream rising from deep within. "Laura," he whispered, "I need to ask you something very important. I know it's strange, but could you show me a photo of your mother?" Laura, visibly confused, nodded. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her pictures, and found the one she was looking for. "This is her," she said, smiling proudly. Javier took the phone with trembling hands. And then time stopped. His eyes locked on the screen, as if he were seeing a ghost. It was her. No doubt. The years had passed. Her hair was shorter. Her skin bore the grace of time. But her eyes, those green eyes that had bewitched him the very first day, were still there. That crooked smile, the one she used to give him on summer afternoons while he spoke of building an empire for the two of them. "Where does your mother live?" he asked, barely breathing. "In Cuenca, sir," Laura replied. "Do you know her? Why are you asking so many questions?" Javier stood abruptly, knocking his wine glass to the floor, shattering it. The restaurant fell silent as diners turned to look, but he didn't notice. His entire world was cracking. "I need to know everything about her. Everything. Her past, her job, your childhood. When was she born? What has she told you about your father?" Laura stepped back, alarmed. "You're scaring me. I don't understand what's going on." Javier sat back down, facing his hands, trying to steady his breath. "I'm sorry, Laura. It's just that your mother looks exactly like someone I once knew. Someone who meant everything to me." "Well," Laura said cautiously, "my mom's always lived in Cuenca. She worked as a secretary at a notary office until she retired a few years ago. She's always been very private. As for my father, I don't know much. She says he died in a construction accident when I was a baby. He was an architect, according to her." Javier's blood ran cold. An accident, an architect. It couldn't be a coincidence. And if it wasn't, then everything he believed for the last 25 years had been a carefully orchestrated lie. Javier slowly slid the ring off his finger, the one he hadn't removed in decades, and held out to Laura with a mix of fear and desperate hope. "Do you recognize it?" he asked, his voice tight. "Is it the same as your mother's?" Laura took it gently, turning it between her fingers as though she were handling a sacred relic. Her eyes widened as she read the hidden inscription inside the band. "Endless love," she whispered. "It's exactly the same. Even the font. It's identical." A chill ran down Javier's spine. That phrase had been his private vow to Clara. No one else knew it. No one except the two of them. "Laura," he said, a resolve rising from deep within, "I need to go to Cuenca tonight. Would you come with me?" The young woman looked at him as if questioning his sanity. "To Cuenca? Now? Why? I'll pay you 1,000 euros to come with me. I just need you to take me to your mother. Nothing more." Laura studied him in silence for a few long seconds, trying to decipher the man before her was speaking truth or had simply lost his mind. "Okay," she finally replied, voice firm. "But if you try anything strange, I'm calling the police. Understood?" Javier smiled for the first time in years. If that happens, call anyone you want. I've got nothing to hide, only everything to regain. That night, as the black Audi sliced through the darkness of the highway toward Cuenca, Laura kept stealing glances at the man beside her. His hands trembled slightly on the wheel, as if his entire soul was on the verge of collapse. "Can you please tell me what's really going on?" she asked, breaking the tension in the car. Javier didn't take his eyes off the road. 5 years ago, they told me my wife Clara had died in a car accident. I buried her. I mourned her. I thought it was the end. But now I believe she never died. That I was lied to. That she, your mother, is that same woman. Laura blinked, confused. "And why do you believe that?" "The rings. Her name. Your birthday. The resemblance. It all fits. And if I'm not wrong, you might be my daughter." They reached Cuenca shortly after 1 a.m. The cobbled streets of the old town were deserted. Laura directed him to a small side street where a modest building stood, its shutters half closed. They climbed the stairs in silence. Javier's heart pounded like a prisoner in his chest. Laura knocked gently on the door. "Mom, it's me. Please open up." After a few unbearable seconds, slow footsteps echoed from the other side. The door creaked open, revealing a woman in a nightgown, her hair tousled, her face still swollen from sleep. But the moment her eyes landed on Javier, everything changed. The color drained from her face. She gripped the doorframe as if the world had begun to spin too fast. "Clara," Javier whispered. "It's me." She didn't respond. She just stared like she was seeing a ghost. "Hi, Clara," he said, his voice trembling. "We need to talk. And this time, you can't run." Clara looked at her daughter, panic in her eyes. "What have you done, Laura? How did you find him? Is it true?" Laura asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "Is he my father?" Clara said nothing. She simply brought both hands to her face and began to cry. "Come in," she murmured at last, opening the door fully. "I guess I can't hide anymore." The small living room was dimly lit. Clara slipped on a jacket over her nightgown and sat on a worn couch that seemed frozen in time. Her eyes glistened, her stare lost in the flood of memories. Javier couldn't wait. "How long have you known I was alive?" Clara looked him in the eyes, a blend of love, fear, and resignation in her gaze. "I always knew you hadn't died. I never believed the stories about the accident. Then why did you fake your death? Why did you disappear?" Clara took a deep breath, gathering courage to reopen a wound sealed shut by fear for decades. "Because I found out what you'd gotten yourself into, Javier," she said, voice breaking. "The deals with Elias Castano, the money laundering, the threats, all of it." Javier froze. His back tightened like a bowstring ready to snap. "How did you know about Elias?" "He followed me one night," Clara replied, lowering her gaze. "Cornered me in an alley. Said if I didn't disappear from your life, he'd kill both of us. No options. No escape." Laura, listening from the edge of the room, was utterly lost. Who was this Elias Castano? "A very dangerous man," Javier said bitterly. "A criminal. The worst mistake of my life was trusting him." Clara continued without pause. "Elias offered me a deal. If I faked my death and vanished forever, he'd let you live. But if I stayed, we'd both end up buried. I couldn't let that happen. And you agreed without even telling me?" Javier asked, his voice cracking. Clara met his eyes, unwavering. "I was pregnant, Javier, 2 months along. How could I risk our child's life?" Javier slowly turned to Laura, seeing her as if for the first time, as if all the pieces of shattered puzzle had just locked into place. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have tried to stop me. You would have confronted Elias. And all 3 of us would have ended up dead." Laura suddenly stood, knocking a chair aside. "So I've lived 23 years inside a lie? I did it to protect you." Clara wept. "I made up a story. Told you your father died in a construction accident. It was the only way to keep you safe. I grew up thinking I was an orphan," Laura said, her voice shaking with anger and sadness. Javier stepped toward her, cautious. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. If I had known you existed, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you. Clara went on. After faking my death, Elias kept his word. He never came near us again. But he also warned me, if you ever came looking or if I ever tried to reach out, we wouldn't survive it. So what changed? Javier asked. 5 years ago, Clara replied. I saw in the newspaper that Elias was dead, caught in a mob shootout. That was the only news that gave me peace. For the first time, we were free. Then why didn't you come back to me? Clara lowered her eyes to the floor. Because it was too late. I felt like a shadow of the woman you once loved. I couldn't just show up and pretend nothing had happened. Laura, overwhelmed by the emotional storm, headed for the door. I need air. I need to think. She walked out without another word, leaving her parents alone for the first time in over 2 decades. The silence between them was thick, heavy with everything they'd never said. She looks like you, Clara murmured. And she has your fire, Javier replied with a bittersweet smile. Then Clara did something that stunned him. She took off the ring she'd hidden all those years and handed it to Javier. I suppose it doesn't belong to me anymore. Javier shook his head slowly. That ring was always yours. And it still is. No matter what. After you disappeared, Javier said, I sold everything. Walked away from that world. Elias got what he wanted. He took the only thing that ever truly mattered. Clara looked at him differently now, as if seeing the man she had once loved. That brings me some peace, she said softly. Javier stepped closer. I know a lifetime has passed, that we're not the same people anymore. But do you think there's still something worth rebuilding? Clara hesitated. The scars of time don't fade easily. Maybe, she finally said, maybe being different isn't so bad. Maybe now we can build something new, something better. At that moment, the apartment door opened quietly. Laura walked back in, her face still wet, but her eyes carried something else now, calm. I've been thinking a lot, she said, her voice steady but charged. And I've decided I want to give you a chance, as my father, but on my terms. Javier stood without hesitation. Whatever you need, daughter, I'll do anything. First, no more secrets. Not one more. I swear it, Javier answered firmly. Second, I want to get to know you slowly. Step by step. No pressure. Clara nodded, smiling gently. We'll do it your way, sweetheart. And third, Laura looked Javier in the eyes. Promise me you'll never again put work, money, or business above family. Javier stepped forward and gently took her hands. I give you my word. I've learned the hard way. All the money in the world is worthless if you end up alone in an empty room, without the ones you love. Laura watched him for a few seconds that felt like an eternity, and finally, with a slight nod, she said, Then we can try. Clara couldn't hold back. She pulled them both into an embrace. For the first time in over 2 decades, she felt that time had destroyed everything. There was still something left to rebuild. 6 months later, the rooftop of Javier's most luxurious hotel in Valencia had been transformed into a warm, intimate celebration. White balloons, soft lights, and laughter floated through the air. It was Laura's 24th birthday, and for the first time in her life, she was celebrating surrounded by a complete family. The road hadn't been easy, but it had been deeply transformative. Laura had quit her old job and started studying hotel management, guided by her father's experience, who now proudly funded her education. Clara had moved to Madrid, close to Javier's apartment, and little by little, they had learned how to speak again, as if the silence of 25 years had never existed. What do you think? Laura asked, twirling in the navy blue dress Clara had given her. You look radiant, her mother whispered, adjusting her necklace lovingly. Then Javier approached, holding a small velvet box in his hands. Laura, there's something I want to give you. She opened it with curiosity. Inside was a rose gold ring, crafted in a similar style to the family's rings, but clearly unique, entirely hers. I had this ring made just for you. It's not a replica, it's yours. It symbolizes the beginning of a new tradition. Laura couldn't hold back her tears. She slipped the ring onto her finger and, with her voice trembling, said for the first time, Thank you, Dad. Javier felt his soul fill with light. He pulled her into a tight embrace, his own tears falling freely. "I love you, my daughter." Clara joined them, wrapping her arms around them both. At last, it felt like the missing pieces of the past were finally falling into place. During dinner, Laura stood up with a glass in her hand. The entire rooftop fell silent. 6 months ago, I thought I was an orphan with no story. Today, I have a complete family. We're still learning how to be one. But I've realized something. The best families aren't the ones that start perfect. They're the ones that choose to fight every day to become one. Javier raised his glass. To second chances. Clara did the same. To the kind of love that knows how to wait. Laura smiled. And to the families who find each other again just when they thought all hope was gone. 3 years later, Javier and Clara remarried. This time in a simple, emotional ceremony by the sea. Laura walked her mother down the aisle, her heart filled with a joy words could never express. Javier had transferred much of his hotel empire into a family foundation he created with Clara, dedicated to helping people separated by extreme circumstances. Clara now led the project with passion, turning past pain into a mission of hope. Laura graduated with honors and now runs one of the family's most prestigious hotels, proving she inherited not only her father's business sense, but also her mother's deep sensitivity. One night, as the three of them shared dinner on the terrace of their country home outside Madrid, Laura lifted her glass and smiled. "You know what's the most incredible thing about all of this?" "What?" Javier and Clara asked in unison. "That it all began with a ring. If I hadn't been working in that restaurant that day, if I hadn't noticed the ring on your hand, we might never have found each other." Javier took both their hands in his. "Fate has strange ways of giving back what we thought was lost." Clara nodded, moved. "Sometimes the most valuable things appear when we stop looking. And sometimes," Laura added with a smile, "happy endings arrive just when you least expect them." Javier looked at the ring on his finger, then Clara's, and finally Laura's. 3 rings, 3 souls, 3 lives that fate had torn apart and brought back together. This story wasn't perfect. It was filled with mistakes, silence, and difficult choices. But it was also filled with love. A love that survived fear, time, and wounds. If this story touched your heart, leave a heart in the comments. Do you believe fate guides us back to the ones we love? Have you ever lived through a coincidence that changed your life? Tell us your story of reunion, of unexpected miracles, of broken bonds that found their way back. Like this video if you believe that family love can overcome any distance. Subscribe if you still believe in second chances. And share this video with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to start again. Because sometimes a single ring is the key that opens the door to the most important reunion of your life. Did you enjoy this emotional story? Then hit like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next one. We'll see you in the next video, where true emotions remind us once again that real love, true love, always find its way back. We love you, soul families.